Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's MD and DI webinar and panel discussion, Regulatory Insights, the Future of MedTech and Pharma under the New Administration, sponsored by Nelson Labs and Regulatory Compliance Associates, and broadcast by Informa. I'm Michael Krieger. I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. First of all, event is interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of the screen will allow you to learn about our speakers, download resources, share this webinar, and most importantly, participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our discussion. Toward the end of our event, we will ask you to complete our survey. Please take just a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. And lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, just click on the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now on to our panel discussion, Regulatory Insights, the Future of MedTech and Pharma under the New Administration. Discussing today's topic is our panel, including Rona LeBlanc Rivera, PhD, Principal Consultant of Regulatory Affairs at Regulatory Compliance Associates, Anita Michael, Executive Principal Consultant for Pharma Compliance, also at RCA, Thor Rollins, Biocompatibility Expert at Nelson Labs, and Alpa Patel, MSRN and RCM Director of Lab Operations at Nelson Labs. And to learn more about our speakers, you can see their bios. Just visit the speakers widget at the bottom of the screen. With that, let's get started with our panel discussion today. So let me start out with this question. How will the new administration impact FDA approval for products? Ronald, let's start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll touch on 2 points. First, I think we'll see, as under the first Trump administration, we'll see a reduction in regulations or push to reduce regulations. So the first time around, there was sort of a 2-for-1 program where for every new regulation introduced, 2 had to be removed. I think we'll see more of that. I think it'll be pushed even further, perhaps 3-for-1. I've heard rumors of even up to 10-for-1. So for every new regulation introduced, 10 others would have to be removed. It's unclear at this stage which ones or what types will be the focus, but I do see somewhere in the range of 3 to 10 trade, let's say, for regulations being proposed. Do I expect a change in regulatory review timelines for applications, let's say NDA applications, ANDA applications? In my opinion, I don't think those review timelines will be changing. I don't see them getting shorter. In the new incoming administration, Why do I say that? Well, review timelines are currently dictated under the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, PDUFA, the Generic Drug User Fee Act, GDUFA, and those review timelines for new submissions, standard priority submissions, major and minor amendments, supplements, what have you, those are all set until 2027. So in order for those timelines that are already prescribed under those user fee acts to change, I think we would need to see some other superseding regulation. But I really don't see review timelines changing from the current 10-month standard review time. Or I do see some timelines changing. I think they will be slower depending on the workforce reductions that are planned. Depending on the level of FDA reviewer that's impacted, I would anticipate an increase in missed goal dates, delayed goal dates. I can see timelines being slower, not faster.
You know, Rana, just to add to that, it's interesting you say that because I do think there are, like you mentioned, prescribed dates that they need to hit, and that's what, and the FDA has been great at trying to work through those dates and meeting those dates, and I don't see that changing. But you mentioned about the, some of the maybe personnel restrictions depending on what happens here in a little bit as far as, cuts within the FDA. I mean, right now, the FDA is already pretty lean when it comes to the people that they have based on the workload that they currently have. And so, like, we already know of some tips and tricks that might happen where maybe, you know, they're short on timeline, so maybe they'll do some comments on a submission that they need additional information on, and that might be true, and it might be that they're looking to stall a little bit, so I could maybe see a little bit more of those types of avenues. And then I also think maybe some good things that could happen out of this is with the pain of reduction, maybe there is going to be looking at more automation within the FDA, which I know they've made some advances, but there are obviously some really big things they could do to try to help these reviewers with their workload. So maybe this will also push more automation and more, efficiencies within the review process just based on reduction of personnel potentially.
And I would agree with that. I think the reviewers, I think FDA or HHS in general, looking for more technological advancements to increase reviewer efficiency. One big program that was coming was the CASA, Knowledge Aided, the Structured Assessment, which was going to be, the intent is to sort of streamline data inputs into applications. There was to be an FDA webinar specifically on this tomorrow, which was just postponed until further notice. As you know, all communications from FDA have been halted for the time being. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. But I agree. I think we'll see an increase in technology to help the reviewers.
Let me remind everyone in the audience you could submit questions to our panelists at any time. We'll get to as many of them as we can after we're done with our discussion. So let me ask another question, and relating to inspections. What changes can companies expect to see regarding inspections? Anita, why don't you take that one?
Sure. Some of the changes I see coming forth is when a company receives either a classification of NAI based on an inspection, VAI, or OAI, VAI being voluntary action indicated, OAI being official action indicated. With some of the cutbacks coming forth, the firm who has an OAI, official action indicated, or VAI could be unacceptable. It may cause longer lead times for re-inspections due to these cutbacks in budgets. However, for the major inspections that are currently conducted globally and domestically, they will probably remain the same. Pre-approval inspections for your ANDAs, NDAs, also your biological license applications with pre-notifications should be the same, and your surveillance inspections such as your GMP. Additional changes that we may see coming aboard, and to Thor and Rana's point, is the use of data analytics. So now we may look at an enterprise transformation for the agency. There's a possible $2 million increase for modernization activities for critical inspection platform for data optimization across the agency, driving those data analyticals based globally on the data provided where companies are either falling short of the GMPs or making the GMPs and doing a risk assessment to target additional inspections. Also, to combat what we've already seen through COVID is the shortage and the supply chain. FDA may advance their capabilities to respond to these drug shortages through improved analyticals again and regulatory approaches, to Ron and Thor's point. And FDA will possibly get a $12.3 million increase to hire additional investigators for inspections for the supply chain disruptions that may happen in the future and shortages that we've seen in recent years. So driving that data analytical platform, AI, and risk-based assessments that the agency has already been working towards for a pretty long time and also implemented it during COVID, I see that coming forward, especially with the cutbacks and the alignment changes.
Anita, I have a quick question for you, because you mentioned, and you would know this with your history, being in the agency and doing inspections, you noted that they're going to be potentially with this an increase in remote inspections because of cutbacks, right? Or just technology in general. What differences does a a company have to think about to prepare themselves for more virtual versus in person? Like, how does it make it easier for a remote inspection because we're so used to in person? Like, what are some tips and tricks you might have?
There definitely is a strategy. We will probably see an increase in remote inspections due to cutbacks and realignment and just becoming more efficient. We may see an increase in the remote audits, to your point, Thor, under the mandatory RRA, under Section 704A4 of the FD&C Act, which is in place. And you could see an increase in the voluntary remote requests. Now, the differences are for the mandatory remote audits, what you want to do is you want to become more prepared with your record repository. You want to have everything electronic. You want to have your policy signed and approved and reviewed, uploaded with the most recent across all the 6 systems that the agency will go into. So we know for GMP pre-approval and also BLA that there's a 6-system approach. For PAI, it's a bit different for pre-approval. But in simple terms, you want to have that electronic repository ready to go, which means uploading and reviewing and having accurate data in there that you can present to the agency electronically. You also have the option of doing what's called a voluntary remote request, which I say you should do and get ready to do, where you'll do a virtual recording. You can also provide them with streamlined videos of your processes in manufacturing, teleconferencing, and screen sharing. So, you want to definitely get ahead of that. That's something during COVID that the agency has implemented. So they know how to do it. And going forward, if you want to be more efficient, they're probably going to work with those remote inspections more. And there are many more records you'll have to have ready because it's usually done by a larger team.
Thank you for sharing that, Anita. I did have a question about, I do think there will be a growing focus on ensuring data integrity and cybersecurity. We are heavily involved in that already with the administration, and companies that are dealing with the rise of digital healthcare products and home care use products, software-based devices, and data-heavy systems. I think there will be more scrutiny with the FDA review. And do you think that would require on-site visits, or only high-risk devices and cybersecurity issues can be done virtually?
So I think it's two-pronged. Any kind of, if there ever came a time, which could come in the future, where there be an integration of computerized systems, you want to make sure that the computerized systems are validated and Part 11 compliant, especially for anything GMP or anything that could touch GMP for research and development. The next area is you want to prepare for your data integrity for your documentation based on a COLA. Do you have controls in place for the data? Is the data activities documented at the time it's happening? Can only authorized individuals make changes to the data? How is that data changed? And what are your standards, your quality standards for accuracy, completion, compliance with established requirements? So, we talk about cybersecurity and computer validation together. That's one area. And then also your GDP, your electronic records, and some of your electronic and automated platforms.
Also interesting. Right. Yeah, one of the other things, Anita, and the whole panel that I think might be interesting is, recently the FDA, at least on the CDRH side, came out with a memo about fraudulent labs, especially in certain parts of the world. And I'm wondering if these a tendency to move more virtually, one, will now have the FDA get more opportunity to audit labs that maybe were difficult to get to historically before they had more virtual options. But also, as a company, if you've never really been audited by the FDA because maybe you're low risk or whatever, I would foresee that if they're doing more virtual audits, they'll have more capacity to do audits. I know we're talking about reduction of potential force or resources within the FDA, but if they don't have to travel that might open up for more capabilities to do audits. And so companies out there who maybe don't routinely get audited by the FDA, do you foresee that we might see more audits like that because they can have the opportunity to do it more virtually?
Yes, and to that point, Thor, when you have a remote audit, you will have a remote audit record request that'll come in for mandatory ones. And it's nearly impossible to create or gather together those records that are required, your master formulation records, your process validation, your qualification reports, any kind of environmental monitoring programs you have. Those things need to be completed. So that's one way to work with high risk companies domestically and internationally that may be doing, say, for instance, sterility testing or endotoxin testing or any type of thing for perennials. There'll be that record request that will come forth. And then also the virtual audit where you'll have to actually walk the agency through real time and show them your HPLC machine, your rapid micro technique you're utilizing. How are you doing this method? So I do feel that we'll have a lot more inspections coming forward with remote inspections. And then if something is troubling, they could always pull an on-site inspection to verify.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Let me again remind everyone in attendance, you can submit your questions to our panelists at any time. We will get to as many of them as we can after our discussion. So the new administration has said quite vocally that tariffs are on the horizon. How will new tariffs impact supply chains, and could the additional costs trickle down to the consumer? Thor, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is kind of a Pandora's box. I've been thinking about this quite a bit because, we just got done with COVID, and I tell you, so I'm a biocomp person, and my team, we spent right during and after COVID, so many assessments on new materials, right? Because supply chains were so interrupted during COVID that people were scrambling to try to get multiple suppliers that they could get their hands on materials. I think we just got to a point where people are feeling pretty good about their supply chain again. And now we have the possibility of maybe some interruptions or higher costs in supply chain. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a political person as far as like knowledge of if this is really going to happen or not. But if we do see tariffs, especially where on countries that are historically suppliers of raw materials for medical devices, I could definitely see a reevaluation of our supply chain again, because most people go to these countries for costs. You're buying it at quite a large amount, and so you're looking at cost savings by going and purchasing these in countries that might provide a lower cost option. If we see tariffs on those that increase the cost, now do you think, okay, do I source locally now? Maybe that's financially an option. But now my supply costs have risen, and I know a lot of my customers, it's not like they can just automatically raise the cost of their medical devices, for example, because sometimes they have contracts within like insurance companies, or in Europe, there are a lot of times they have contracts with the governments that the government will only pay this much for certain medical devices. So it's not like they can just, for some devices, they can increase price, but for other devices, they're stuck for a while. And so now where does that increased costs come or hit? Do they suck it into their margins? Do they decrease cost in other areas, like looking at R&D or others? I don't know. It's something that we have to think about. But we start thinking about sourcing locally for sustainability questions, right? Like if you think about the impact on the environment, shipping things across the world, maybe this is some positive, but then you start looking at the cost and impact on our customers. I think there's some negative in there too. So, and then ultimately that cost will probably shift to the consumer. And so as a potential patient, you got to think about the already high costs of healthcare. So I do think this is a big question about what we might see if the tariffs take effect.
Okay.
And
Thanks
I
so
couldn't
much
agree more.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I couldn't agree more with Thor. When we did see, it takes me back to COVID time when we had disinfection, because we do validations. We needed disinfection. We needed disinfectants in healthcare, and many medical devices that do get sanitization or or disinfected, we didn't have those disinfected particle devices here, right? So we had to come up with new chemicals that we could use, but those needed to be validated. And to do that retrospective with chemicals that we cannot get and assume that it's working, does this bring into attention the devices that are already out there? Are we using the right chemicals for it? Will it hurt the patient? So there is a backtrack on that as well. I met with our healthcare director for central processing departments. This is the CSPD departments that clean reusable medical devices in the hospitals. And they are stockpiling everything and making sure that they have enough chemicals, they have enough detergents, they have enough everything, and just bringing everything back in. And do they have space for that? And who takes on that added burden and added cost? It's probably the consumer that is going in the hospital and getting these procedures done. So it does trickle down over to the consumer side.
So when looking at the 2025 FDA budget and what the administration has said about cutbacks, how do you think it'll impact the FDA's participation in industry conferences and events? Thor?
So I'll start this one off. It already has. So we've had some conferences that are coming up. I have one next week that I'm on the program committee for, and the FDA has notified that there's a pause on all mass communication and public appearances that are not directly related to emergencies or critical to preserving of health. And so this is the one thing that honestly probably worries me the most of the potential changes. I think there's, like any change, there's going to be good and bad things that come about changes. For me, this is the one that worries me the most about potential impact. I feel like in all of us are very engaged in some of these activities. Alpa and I both sit on ISO standards where we participate very closely with the FDA. And in recent years, that relationship has been amazing. To have them be partners with us in developing standards and test methods, and we're working through alternative methods like in vitro alternatives to animal testing or rapid methods for microbiology. And the FDA has really, even though sometimes we disagree on approaches, they've been very open on discussing that and working with us, inviting us to come in and present at the facilities. And I think having them be removed from that process is a step back. I think it's a detriment to our progression of science in MedTech, which we're already way behind our other industries. If you look at, some of even food and even pharma, I'm talking about med device, we're way behind, and I think this would limit our ability to catch up. So we are even seeing them being removed from certain test methods from ASTM, and Alpa can talk about that too. So I do think right now, at least in this very short time that we've seen a change, it's not been positive with as far as being able to have a partnering relationship with the FDA.
Absolutely. And currently, just this week, we were supposed to have a biofilm conference in Arlington, and we were notified that the FDA will not be presenting or even attending the conference. And majority of the topics were going to be spoken by the FDA. So that was a setback. Biofilm is something big in the industry that hasn't come out yet, but we're collaborating and working with them to bring test methods up for them. There are some, but for reusable devices and other types of products, they aren't. And this was the platform where we could collaborate and discuss new test methods and how we can do, but now we cannot. Yesterday, I was on a call with ASTM. We're writing a publication. We've done research for 2 years on a round-robin testing, and FDA has been very, very good partners with us on this because we're trying to come up with a new test method. And during the publication, we were told to remove their names for now and until further clarification happens, which is unfortunate because these collaborations is what hinders innovation and helps us move forward in the science, just like Thor said. We need to be partners in the industry, and we need to be together if we want to move forward in the healthcare industry or even pharma. Without we are three-legged stool, right? Test labs, regulatory, and manufacturers. All three of us have to be sitting on the same table and working together. And if we don't have one, then we have a broken stool, and that will affect us long term.
I want to give a quick example to what Alpa just said. So right now with biocompatibility, extractable and leachable testing is a huge part of our biocompatibility program. And there's a lot of uncertainty on how to do those methods. There's a lot of differences from test lab to test lab, potentially differences in results. And so the FDA has been doing a lot recently on trying to standardize, and the ISO documents, trying to standardize the approach using labs, using the regulatory bodies. The FDA even came out with their own guidance document just recently on looking how to do extractable and leachables for a medical device. And they've recently talked about trying to get ASCA, which is a program within the FDA for extractables and leachables. All really important steps to try to help the test labs know what we should do to make sure the results are good. Our manufacturers, our customers, to make sure that they get things done correctly and through the regulatory body at the same time. And honestly, they're reviewers, because sometimes when there's uncertainty, the reviewers themselves have different opinions. I shouldn't say sometimes, a lot of times. And so to try to get everybody on the same page, which is what a standard is, they were making some really good progress. If we stop right now, we're kind of actually going backwards. We won't go forward. And that's the worry I have. That's just an example.
Okay. Thor, Alpa, Anita, Rana, I want to thank you for the discussion. Hang on. We've got a bunch of questions already in the console from our attendees. But before we get to our Q&A, I want to ask all of you to direct your attention to the webinar survey, which is available next to the presentation window. And if you close the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking the icon along the bottom of your screen. And again, thanks for participating. It just helps us make these events better for all of you. And now on to our Q&A. As a reminder, to participate, just type your question into the text box that is located next to the presentation window, or click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we're not able to answer all the questions submitted today, we will be sure to share them with our panelists who can reply to you offline. Let me start with a question from Peter, who asks Thor and Rana, what would an example of automation or technology be available to help FDA personnel complete the NDA or ANDA reviews?
Rana, I don't know if you want to go first on that one. Do you know of any example of automation or technology that would be available?
Not specific systems. I know they are discussing ways to do that, to come up with the system. I know a lot of the FDA budget has to do with internal IT infrastructure and sort of ramping that up. One that I mentioned, the CASA, the Knowledge Aided Structured Application, tomorrow's webinar was canceled, but that would rely on algorithms to help the FDA reviewers pull out structured input information, and so they could do a risk-based analysis of what's in the application versus the narrative review that is currently takes place. So, and the CASA is not a new concept. It's been around over 5 years. We'll see if that if the input of that speeds up. Hopefully it does, because I think the reviewers will need extra help going forward. And in relation to that, another guidance that was draft guidance FDA issued for firms to be aware of has to do with considerations on the use of AI to support regulatory decision making. So that one, some things that be considered on the industry side for that would be the data used to help develop the AI model should be sort of fit for use, relevant, accurate, reliable, and companies should consider drift, data drift during the life cycle of these AI models. So there's some concepts and process. There are no specifics at this time that I'm aware of.
And I would agree. The only thing I would add, and this doesn't go to like automation to help the companies out, but my premise is going to be more important than ever is try to make the review as easy as possible for the reviewer. One of my friends from the FDA told me the average submission for a medical device was the size of the Tale of Two Cities book, right? So if you look at what that would take to go through and understand, I mean, it's a daunting kind of proposition. So like pre-subs, if you have any questions, talking with the FDA to get clarification, try just to make it as easy as possible for them to be able to go through and follow. So you're not like making it difficult to even understand the submission. I mean, lots of times people don't even put pictures of the device in the submission, and I don't know how the reviewers will even know what they're looking at without things like that. So my advice would be just talk to a reviewer and make sure, try to make it as easy for them as possible.
Good advice. Keep the questions coming. We will get to as many of them as we can in the time remaining. This one from Crystal, who says sustainability is a hot topic for the medical device and pharmaceutical sectors, especially in the EU. What can we expect to see in the US for sustainability-related regulations under the new administration?
I'll let one of you guys, and I've been talking a lot, I'll let one of you guys, I'll give my thoughts on this, but you guys have anything you want to say?
Crickets.
Yeah, so I'll go. Oh, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead. No, go ahead, Thor.
Oh, well, so first off, hi, Crystal. Secondly, I don't see this as a top priority. I don't think it's going to be completely, this is just my assumptions, knowing basically on some of the things that they'll focus on. Like, for example, one of the things that I think about sustainability is the packaging for medical devices. We throw away so much in packaging. Some devices have 3 or 4 layers of packaging. Is that really needed? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at sustainability in our space. In fact, it's probably well overdue. I just don't see that personally seeing a push for this administration. I don't think they'll be against it. I don't think they'll put things against it, but I just don't see you'll see any kind of push towards it, in my opinion.
Crystal,
I do agree with that, Thor. Especially when we are seeing single-use devices in Europe, they have a greater focus on sustainability of making them into reusable, or at least process them a couple of times to reuse the same device and show that it can be reused. In US, we are very throwaway friendly. And so you use once, you throw it away. There is no thought process of how can I make this reusable. But we are seeing a lot of emphasis and a lot of discussion on how we can make single-use devices now into reusable. But Europe is headway in there. Under the new administration, I don't think this will be a focus. But if tariffs are high enough, I think that is something that manufacturers may want to think about.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. Keep the questions coming. This one from Ron, who says, the FDA has been slow to accept new approach methods, or NAMs, for the preclinical safety assessment of drugs and devices. Do you see an increased willingness on the part of the agency to accept new validated methods and processes that can streamline the evaluation process and make it more efficient?
I'll start this one because I think I know this, Ron. So thanks, Ron, for the question. I hope so. I'm a huge believer in alternative methods to animal testing. I think there's a lot of data out there to show that they're better and more efficient. And the FDA has been slow to recognize that. They have their reasons, and that's good. But to your point, Ron, I think the push will be due to just capacity. If we see, resources being thin, they're looking for automation. They may look at where, ASCA was put in to try to help with reduction in time for submissions. Biocompatibility is one of the areas that they spend a lot of time reviewing. So if they could look at ways to make that more efficient, and the potential of using in vitro methods or NAM methods might be something on their radar. Once again, I don't see necessarily a push from the top of the administration to consider animal testing or in vitro over animals, because I just haven't seen a push from the top on that. Really, there's been discussion from Congress. You think of the two modernization acts that have been going to the FDA to try to help evaluate in vitro alternatives. but there just hasn't been a lot of enforcement throughout the FDA on those. I unfortunately don't necessarily see that happening with this administration either. Maybe, I just don't necessarily see it.
Okay, thanks so much for that. Again, keep the questions coming. We will get to as many of them as we can during the time we have remaining. Robin asks, how should life science enterprises prepare their quality management systems for the new administration, given the amount of electronic records?
So I'll take this one. I think we need to drive for your quality management system with the new requirement for a lot of electronic records to focus on the key processing parameters, to do a proper trend analysis, to look at the high areas for your QMS system that impact patient safety and quality, and then start to drive your data analytics through proven data and metrics. For instance, you could use your QMS system to look at your lot acceptance rate. You could also look at it to look at the product quality complaint rate, or how, what is the data that's driving under your invalidated OOS investigations. So really honing in on your QMS systems around those areas, driving your CAPA system for corrective action, and staying more abreast and proactive for compliance so you don't have to face enforcement. So because under the new upcoming changes, it may take a long time to get back into compliance with the agency. So your QMS system is going to become number one. And there are systems now that integrate it. You have eDocs available, systems that also have platforms for process validation. They can also link into your regulatory submissions and electronic versions for that, where you can pull metrics from. And those systems are available and readily used throughout the pharma and device industry.
Very good. Thank you. Again, keep the questions coming. This one from Anne, who says, do you see protectionism as one of the directions the new administration could take? This could lead potentially for the FDA to favor American companies, but could lead to shortages in devices, as well as not getting what would be best outcomes for healthcare facilities and patients.
Well, I would love to hear Anita and Rana on this one, because you guys are all both from the agency historically. I'll quickly give my opinion on this. I don't think you'll see, and maybe Rana and Anita will disagree to this, but I don't think you'll see outright protectionism. I don't think they'll favor submissions like some countries do, where they'll make it a lot harder for companies from outside the U.S. to get through the regulatory process compared to American companies. But what I will see is what we just talked about, which is the tariffs. I do think that maybe they'll try to look at protecting more of the U.S. companies keeping the manufacturing or the supply of their medical devices in the U.S. instead of having the trend of seeing those go outside the U.S. So, I mean, that's a potential, but I don't see them kind of saying, okay, we're going to make it really easy for an implant from a U.S. company to get through the FDA, but then we're going to make it difficult for one from China, for example. I just don't see that happening, but I'd love to hear from my ex-FDA friends.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you're going to see favoritism as far as having domestic companies, their applications all of a sudden shoot to the front of the queue, the review queue, over applications from ex-US. I think you will see more of a push for manufacturing to be brought back to the US. I do see that happening, supply chain changes. So I think companies might need to start considering having more than one source of API in their application, for example. I see that being more of a push versus favoring a US-based application over an ex-US application.
I agree with you, Rana and Thor. I also see that if you have an international FDA inspection for pre-approval or GMP, that you definitely want to drive your compliance again. I see a push for looking more towards, I know we have heavily relied on the ICH guidance documents such as 7, 8, 9, and 10. I see more of that going forth in the future. and then also a longer lead time for foreign inspections if they need to be re-inspected, because we did have a lag time prior, Rana, for that, somewhere upwards of 5 years before they came back out. So in short, it may be easier to re-inspect a company in the United States just because of where it's located than internationally. But I don't see a favoritism.
The only thing I thought of, and maybe you guys could tell me because you're experienced, but historically, audits of companies outside the United States has been less common than inside, just because of geography. But then with some of the concern that the FDA's had with maybe labs outside the United States, or maybe there is some concern about outside companies and how regulated they are. Do you ever see maybe more increase in not coming in submissions, but them going out and enforcing, especially virtually now, those audits internationally more? Do you think we'll see more international audits than we had before because it's virtual and maybe they're pushing more to regulate international companies? I mean, maybe not, but I just didn't know if you guys think that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. And I do think that there has been a lot of effort and time to do a risk-based assessment for conducting audits internationally. So of course, to your point, Thor, I agree with that. If they need to get out there and they maybe need to see 3 firms, they could definitely do the mandatory remote requirement for record review and then see whether a company is willing to do the virtual audit included with that. And then to the point to do a follow-up. So yes, I think it's totally based on patient safety and quality, and that would remain in focus. And if those additional audits need to be completed or inspections, of course, we probably would see a uptick in that.
Okay. Keep the questions coming. We have a bunch of them in the queue. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. This one from Josie, who asks, do you think with the focus on reduction of regulations of the new administration that the upcoming effective date of this QMSR for medical devices will be altered or postponed?
Anita, Rona, what do you guys think?
Well, I think the first thing is, would you need a reduction in the regulation, or would you need to do a metrics analysis of which regulations companies are meeting and maybe they're low risk, and go for the ones that companies are not meeting based on track and trending of repeated 483s or repeated issues? So maybe we don't need to, the first step wouldn't be to remove the regulation, which eventually could happen, but maybe the first step is to target the ones that the industry is having no problem meeting, and then you go for the ones where we have repetitive patient safety issues. And then I'll turn it to Ron and Thor.
I'm not so sure about the delay on that one. I mean, it's possible. Right now, I think anything, because they're basically being told, right, that everything needs to be reevaluated. There's a pause to be reevaluated for priority. So I would say anything that the FDA has been working on, there's a possibility that there could be a pause to it until we see the priority list. But that would be a guess on my part.
Yeah, same. I don't have much more to add. It would just be pure guess.
Okay, with that, let's move on. This question comes from Pallavi, who says, what are the most significant regulatory challenges that pharma companies may face under the new administration?
Rona and Anita, you guys are on the pharma side. I think this is best answered by you guys.
Yeah, I think that's hard to say. I think everything's impacted by the workforce and what's going to happen there. I think right now there's the blackout on communication, and then the impact to reduce workforce, reduced timelines, reduced meetings, reduced. I think that's right now is my was what I'm most concerned with. There's just no communications. We don't know when it's going to start back up. And that's just going to have a domino effect on everything else.
I agree with that, Rana. And I also feel that companies that don't stay ahead of the curve and don't try to get some of their processes automated, getting ready for electronic files and data integrity, and with the possible enterprise transformation where the agency's looking to modernize activities under advances in AI and assessment, companies that haven't stayed ahead of that may find it difficult to keep up.
Oh, sorry, Rona, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just going to add, I don't think companies should sort of take a step backwards in what they have been doing. You know your product, you know your processes. When you're putting your application together, make sure it's a quality application. Tell your story, have your rationale. You're still going to need to have your specifications in the application, your methods, your batch records, your development report. Just make sure you lay out a cohesive story, data-driven, have your scientific justifications in the applications. I don't think we're going to see the need to remove a scientifically driven process here. I think continue along those paths that you have been. If you have opportunities to meet with the FDA, whether it's pre-NDA meetings, pre-IND meetings, pre-ANDA meetings, take advantage of those where you can, control correspondences to get development questions asked. But I don't want there to sort of be a fear out there that all of a sudden, okay, we can just submit whatever we want and FDA is going to be okay with it. No, FDA is still going to be data focused, patient safety focused. They're going to look to see, do you have a product that's safe and effective or do you not? I don't think those are going to change at all.
And what I wanted to bring in, talking to my colleagues in the pharma industry, their concern was with the DI initiatives under the new administration for clinical testing, how that will impact their clinical performance and soliciting people volunteers to do these testing will be very difficult. And so I've been hearing that as well.
Yeah, and I would agree the concerns on this DEI initiatives for clinical trials. I would say in those cases, and just my opinion, I think patient advocacy groups then should weigh in on those sorts of testing and any plan changes. We do know different groups, drug products react differently. We do need the data from different. I don't think, again, that the bar was set with doing clinical trials a certain way. I don't think we should lower standards. I think that would be something that would be my suggestion. You don't want to lower standards, and again, you want to have the best. You want to be patient focused, and let's not get too carried away with what we might be losing.
Okay, good advice. We only have time for a couple of more questions. Here's one from Krista, who asks, with withdrawal from the World Health Organization, will this affect the FDA's compliance, collaboration, or participation with IMDRF?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, when you start looking at the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, right, which is the IMRDF, we just talked about them the official thing is a pause in mass communication of public appearances that are not directly related to emergencies. I'm assuming that would also fall into these types of initiatives also. I think at least in the short term, you're probably not looking at participation in those types of efforts. At least what we're seeing. We're working on a brand new test method right here at Nelson Labs. And we wanted to talk with the FDA just informally on our validation approach for this. And they've just told us that they're not sure if they can even talk to us informally because of the mass communication pause. So I think you're going to have to assume that, at least right now, what we're getting in the couple of weeks we've been at this, that any kind of interaction with the FDA is going to be in danger.
And I do agree with
let's
you
wrap.
on that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I do agree with her on that as well, because I have had some email correspondence on new test methods that I'm working with the FDA for reusable devices, and they specifically reached out to me last week, and this week they said we cannot talk anymore about this until further notice. So we're delaying a lot of these things further on, and it is, so I do see that will impact over time.
Okay. Let's take a question from Tina, who asks, how can we get engaged to push alternatives to animal testing?
That's definitely me, Tina. Please reach out to me. So let me tell you what we can do, what I would like people to do. So the one thing we're missing mostly to help convince the FDA on alternatives is real data on medical devices. We've had a couple companies that partner with us. We can say it because they've been published, right? So we published data with a company called Arthrex, where they did a bunch of data side by side with in vitro and in vivo irritation testing, just to show comparison. Arthrex is an orthopedic company, so the FDA was like, well, this is great, but it's just a very limited types of materials. It's mostly metals and hard polymers and things. And so the more data we can get where we actually have the same medical device going into in vivo and in vitro, and then hopefully actually even showing that the in vitro could screen more effectively, be a little bit more sensitive than the animal tests, the more likely we are to convince the FDA of this as being an acceptable alternative. So, it really just comes down to data. Unfortunately, most companies, and which I totally understand, but most companies look at this as saying, well, and I have to pay for two types of tests to get the same output. I'm just going to keep on using the test that the FDA approves of. And then once the FDA approves the in vitro, then I'll switch over. But that's kind of a chicken and egg thing. We need data to help them switch. So, so please reach out to me. If you've been doing data, if you have data on in vitros that correlates with in vivo, please reach out to me. We'll do it for sure.
For that advice. And this question from Arun, who asks, is there any likelihood of changes in the 180-day exclusivity FDA approvals?
I think they're referring to the exclusivity for generic drug approvals. At the moment, I don't see that changing. I don't see the likelihood of that being altered.
I don't think so either. I have not heard any indication that they're looking to change that length or lengthen it or shorten it. So.
Well, thank you for all those questions. Unfortunately, that's all the questions we have time for today. Thanks. We appreciate our panelists' time and expertise on today's topic. And also thanks to our sponsors, Nelson Labs and RCA, as well as to everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to attend the live event. They could submit their questions while they're reviewing the recording as well. On behalf of our guests, Rana, Anita, Thor, Alpa, I'm Michael Krieger. Thanks for your time and have a great day.